knew this was coming. We were supposed to do this live tonight, and we are not able to. I gotta record. You know what I'm saying? I cannot hold this in any longer. Last night's chapter hit me in all of the ways a good chapter should hit you, boy, man. And ways that in particular make me want to discuss said chapter after I've read it, right? Because obviously there are chapters that I enjoy just as much as these that I don't have the burning desire to go out and discuss it because the reading experience was already good enough, right? But this is one of those chapters that makes me want to turn on the camera, press the red button, and go up and like swimwear. Because there's a lot of good things here that we can discuss. There's quite a few things that we already discussed last night. But there are a few things that I wanted to wait for the Viz translation, but I can't help it, man. I can't help it. And especially since now we're going to be doing Kingdom on Sundays, I was like, brother, we got to do this now or it's not happening. And so allow me just the opportunity to pull out the iPad here as we go through the chapter. In a few particular sections. Obviously, we'll end off on the stabs. I can't believe we got his name, bro. Listen, man. I was brought onto this earth to do quite a few things that I am currently working on attempting to get to those points, right? I know what I came here to do, but I don't know where that's gonna lead me. You know what I'm saying? That's the great part about the adventure of life. You really don't know where things are going to give you, the romance of going on that adventure. But there is one thing that is for certain, dog. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how things took place in regards to the stories that I experienced to get me to the point to where I became a massive fan of the legacy characters, right? Your Jings, your Giottos, your Minatos, the characters that were of legend in the past, that are spoken of in the present with this reverential, like, oh, these guys were just those dudes. You know what I'm saying? I love those types of characters. And the epitome of that has always been within this series, the Shankses, the Rogers, the Whitebeards, right? Like, oh, the Joy Boys, the Nikas. So it's like the more we find out about these characters, the more I'm like, let's flipping go, man. But when you give me another character that is attached to said character, that automatically makes this entire situation even more interesting, with my dog Stabs, aka Fingerland flipping Shamrock, son, Kenny D. Kenny D. Shamrock, and if you don't get that reference, it is a classic wrestling reference, alright? Ken Shamrock, former UFC fighter, comes into the WWF and does his thing. Even had a feud with The Rock, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm remembering that correctly. But our Shamrock is an actual world champion. Our Shamrock is the captain of the God's Knights. The same God's Knights that we were told Monkey D. Dragon and the boys are waiting for before mobilizing. They're waiting for them to mobilize before they make a move. So we know they're them. We see it just based on Gunko and how Gunko is handling business. The fact that Gunko might have been the one that finished off Cobra. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know if the fruit goes back to the Instant Messenger Sama thing, if Emu dispersed these fruits into the others but still maintains essences of those. I don't know, man. I do not know if we're looking at an actual godlike being that can bestow abilities onto others while also maintaining those same abilities, or were the Holy Knights really in the room that day? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. But we'll get into that here in a second. There are a few other things that I want to talk about in regards to this chapter that also connect to last week's chapter, because I think last week's chapter and this week's chapter go hand in hand very, very well in regards to certain things that Ichiro Oda is tackling within this arc, and that's been something I've been fascinated with even from the first 3 chapters. It's why I rated the first 3 chapters as highly as I did in the chapter of the year rankings that we did over on Dax Sake's channel, right? Every single year we do our our favorite chapter of the year rankings, and this year we did them over on Dak's channel. And I rated the 11, 27, 28, 29 stretch extremely high on my list. It was, I believe, 12, 11, and 10, or maybe even higher than that on my list, because it gave me the romance or the East Blue Squad, while at the same time having that incredible sense of adventure that also carries very interesting setup that we still obviously haven't seen the payoff for yet, but it's always in the introduction of certain things that you can see what the author is really trying to say, what he's potentially trying to say with the arc. And we'll have to see how it goes and progresses as it moves forward. With those first 3 chapters, I was already like, this is going to be an arc about creation and misinformation. Right? Off those first 3. With the Roto stuff, with the Sun God stuff, I was like, hold on, man. We are about to dive into creation and misinformation. And obviously we've been getting into misinformation with the stuff with Loki. It probably continuously going to be the case. And now with last week's chapter, with the religious text and the Harley text that has been translated from generation to generation, but no one can truly give you an accurate assessment of what the original text, or at least I don't believe that we found an individual yet that can actually give us an actual reflection of what the original Harley text had to say. Maybe Louis Arno will be that individual. Maybe that individual will be within a flashback or something. Like I strongly do believe we are due for a Mont Blanc Nolan-esque flashback in this arc, and I just truly believe it's going to be Nika. I do think Nika is going to be at the helm of a flashback in this arc, and I'm hoping, man. I'm really hoping. But all of those things being prevalent within the beginning of this arc had me like, okay, how are we going to tackle this? And I think it was very interesting the way that was explored in last week's chapter. What I found very interesting about this week's chapter is that we're heading into the war aspect of the war land, right? With Hadru Dean, and in particular, let's go ahead and go through that particular section of the chapter, because I just found it to be so extremely interesting. About giants being born from a different country, certain territories they believe belong to them, right? Certain bloodlines they believe belong to them, and how these differences over whether it be territory, whether it be superiority or inferiority, or however it is that they view themselves and or the other party. The fact remains is that the wars that we're seeing taking place within the realm of Elbaf, going over territory, bloodline, religion, the exact same things that wars happen over within, obviously, in our actual history, in our actual real time, is a very interesting thing to explore within One Piece. Not just because it's the classic odification of taking something that already exists and bringing it into his own narrative, but it's also because this is specifically known as the War Land. And when we get into the end of the chapter, Shamrock, apologies. I'm gonna call him Stab. Stabs, particular, says, long ago, the savage warriors of Elbaf dominated the New World. And of course, once again, misinformation. This is coming from someone who has been fed propaganda for all of these years within the WG, within the Celestial Dragon system, right? The world government will bring them to heel no matter what. Now, what I find interesting about this is that the truth is always going to be in the middle, right? The middle of what we've heard and what we know from the individuals in Elbaf, and also their propaganda state that we know to be the Celestial Dragons and WG and everything that's being run over there, right? We know that they're a propaganda machine for literally everything. So a lot of the stuff that's being stated over here, you cannot take at face value, but we're also seeing within this arc, you can't take things at face value over here as well. Because Loki is being built up the same way other characters in the series have been built up. And we know that when we actually got to hear their story, see their story, it didn't match up to what we heard about them. It's why we all believe Rox, or why I believe Rox is genuinely a good dude, because everybody's pointing him out to be this heinous villain, similar to how they painted Roger or how they painted Zoro. You know, all these characters that have been misrepresented throughout the course of the series. And so I believe Loki's going to be one of those characters. I mean, you can't have the Gear 5 laugh in a panel, and tell me this guy's not going to be. I mean, he already is one of the goats as far as I'm concerned. But not have him be like a character with extremely good intentions. Now, this could be an exploration of good intentions having consequences, as we've seen throughout the course of the series. But I'm fascinated by the idea of misinformation and how that has been carried forward, not only just with the Harley text and the religious texts, but also in the case of Loki, also in the case now of Shamrock, and how that's going to lead to a potential war scale effort on if Shamrock brings in the Holy Knights, based on this misinformation that has potentially been brought to them. Or because the thing is with the misinformation is because we don't have the full perspective of what happened back then. Maybe the warriors of Elbaf really were savages, but they were savages for a reason, right? And a lot of people look up to that. And so looking at it from their perspective, whenever we get that particular part of their history, well, then maybe potentially looking at it from Shamrock's and or somebody who was directly affected by those giants in their perspective is going to allow us to see the middle ground where the truth really lays. And so that is something I'm really looking forward to seeing explored within the Warland and the war thing that Oda is going for here, in regards to seeing it from both sides in the way that we normally see the conflict shown within One Piece. But especially in a land like the Warland, it is going to be fascinating to see how he explores those types of concepts, knowing how he's Odified so many of those very same real-life concepts to this point. To have something like war being at the center of your arc, and already seeing the nuggets of information that's been given to us, it is going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out in regard, especially to in regards to the themes and how those things are explored through certain characters. And misinformation is going to be at the very, very high point of that, I strongly believe. And so that is extremely fascinating. Now, let's get into dreams. This chapter, the last two chapters, but I want to talk about this chapter. This chapter gave us, obviously, the, once again, letting us know the dream of King Harold, right? An individual who truly tried to form peaceful bonds with the outside world, even known to be Elbaf's strongest king, right? And maybe that has a bit to do with him having conquerors over this, having this extremely strong sense of will, right? Or even like physical and literal strength aside. Just being a strong king in general, to want to bring in this new wave of individuals who have this brand new way of thinking, right? Like normally within the world of One Piece, we've seen that it's the current generation that is bringing in this brand new line of thinking, right? Like we saw that within Wano, we've seen that in Alabasta, we saw that back in Dressrosa, where like the individuals that are coming in now are bringing like a new thought. Some of them inspired obviously by the older era, but they're coming in with a brand new way of tackling certain things that is exclusive, not fully, but to this new generation that's going to take it into this next era. We're seeing that obviously within the WG with individuals like Kobe and in the Marines, and so. The next generation has been so prevalent throughout the course of the entire series that this caught me off guard when I saw it. Because King Harold was the first individual within Elbaf that we know that attempted to exercise this, to go out and form peaceful bonds with the outside world. Maybe those of the past attempted to do it as well, but that of course is something that we do not know of yet. Maybe that's what turned them into savages, or they had to become warriors in order to survive because they were hunted. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see whenever we get to that flashback, which I hope is incoming, right? So but Harold being the first to do this caught me off guard, because normally you would have that within the new generation. That's a new generation mindset. So now we have, obviously, as brought up throughout the last couple of chapters, is this generational dispute between the old generation who believes things should be a certain way and the new generation who believes it should be a different way, right? It's like their own sort of quote-unquote small-scale war that is taking place between the generations. But King Harold being at the center of that really makes you think, or at least made me think, like, okay, we saw how his dream brought forth Loki's wrath. And of course, we don't know the full picture, the full scale of that. We don't know what all went into it, but we understand that both Harold and Loki, in their own way, attempted to fulfill what they believed was right within the lens of what they understand is what Elbaf should be, right? Obviously, through the lens of Nika as well. So it's a very interesting thing. I'm looking forward to seeing the full picture whenever we see like the Loki flashback, which is already being cooked up as we saw last chapter. That we're going to get that at some point, and obviously I think the flashback's going to end with him being tied up, and before it ends with him being tied up, we're going to see what actually took place within this castle against King Harold. And I'm telling you right now, there's a strong reason why individuals of Elbaf, the citizens of Elbaf, are not able to come into this castle. There is a secret being held here of something that took place on that day that no one else saw besides Loki and King Harold. And I'm so excited to see what that actually ends up being, because it might end up being at the very crux of the message that Oda's trying to say with this arc. At least that's what the way it's been with so many of the flashbacks to this point. And so, very excited for that. Now, we saw Harold's dream, obviously, within this chapter. The determination, the willpower that it took for him to try to exercise this, ripping out his horns. You see the physical scars. Even Zoro's like, yo, what conviction, right? Like, what a dude. And so then we go into the next section with Hadruddin, and how Hadruddin's dream and the way that he tackled these things fell into line with a Roto that allowed that story to resonate with a Zoro and Nami, who sort of saw a similar situation, or were able to call back to how they felt when Luffy approached them as well with this crazy bombastic dream of wanting to become king of the pirates, right? And how they gravitated towards it while also being hesitant at first. To be like, who in the flying flattener is this guy? And realizing that he's legit. You know, and a similar type of thing happened with Roto. And so obviously that caused a really cool sequence with Zoro and Nami in particular, who laughed at it. But while in the middle of the stream, I haven't been able to stop thinking about the potential parallels between that sequence and what we saw with the Roger sequence back in the Odin flashback and how it caused Whitebeard and them to laugh. Well, at the same time, the central focal point of chapter 1000 being Ace telling Yamato, do not laugh at this. Sabo and I will not allow you to laugh. And Yamato being like, how could I ever laugh at such a thing? How could I ever laugh at such a thing? Completely different a reaction, right, to the dream. And then we go over to chapter 10 and 16. We see how the entire Straw Hat crew reacts after having been with him on this entire adventure, realizing that this is something that could actually take place because it's Luffy. And so, with that being said, so much of this arc is reminding me of Jaya and Skypiea for a good reason. And so when you give me this particular chapter that gives me a sequence dedicated to Zoro, Nami, and Luffy, which automatically brings me back to one of my favorite stretches in the entire series, which is that section in Jaya where dreams are being challenged. Blackbeard's introduction, of course, the perfect introduction that it is, the people's dreams never end speech, the part in the bar whenever Bellamy and the rest of the hyenas are just battering at them, you know, the Emerald City, the One Piece. Do y'all really think all that stuff truly exists at the crux of what Oda was trying to say with that arc, right? Before they go up in the knock-up stream and prove that Cricket was not capping, that Nolan was not capping, and there actually is an island in the sky, right? It's a very, very beautiful and powerful arc, man. I absolutely enjoy that section of the story. But there's no coincidence that Nami, Zoro, and Luffy are here at the helm of this after they themselves have experienced firsthand what it truly means to not only be laughed at for having a dream, but to have survived this entire journey, having survived being separated, having survived the crew nearly being torn apart in Water 70's lobby, having survived the battles against Arlong and Crocodile and Enel and Lucci, Gecko Moria, getting separated by Kuma, coming back, going up in like Sumer against Dofi, and Big Mom and Kaido and the surviving us the Gorosei. I mean, they've done it, man. And they're still here. And so I found this section to be so beautiful because it called back to a multitude of different things with how the giants being born in a different country, and we see the racism that is at the helm of a multitude of these these conflicts. And of course, it calls back to how things were handled back in Fishman Island in Sabaody, and when that was completely on full display, even going back to Arlong Park, with Nami, of course, being at the center of this, right? Then you get into the dream aspect and the conviction of that, and how important that is to Zoro, the conviction, the determination to put your dream to the side for what's currently taking place, so that you do what you don't want to do, so that way you can do what you want to do later on. It's one of my favorite sequences in the entire series, when Zoro does that before Mihawk, and then of course he comes back stronger than ever. Why? Because he did something that he did not want to do in order to accomplish what he truly wants to accomplish later on, right? And obviously put the loyalty to the Straw Hats at the forefront there, while focusing on his dream. It's an extremely powerful sequence, but we see how the respect there from Zoro to King Harold for that conviction, while at the same time having Nami showing a level of respect to a Rodo, who is also similarly a navigator, but understanding where he's coming from, because she herself was also placed in that very same situation. I just found that entire sequence to be so incredibly beautiful that I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, because it calls back to so many different things. Like I said, it calls back to a multitude of different points in the story, from Arlong Park to Fishman Island to Giant Skypiea to the entire journey, man. And I really, really love this sequence. And obviously, Elbaf has been calling back to a lot of stuff throughout the course of the series, as it is anyway, as was Egghead. I'm going to assume it's going to be that way for the entire final saga. But it just endlessly fascinated me, man. I love this entire sequence. But when you cut over and you get to see that now Hadruddin celebrating with the other giants, states like, I'm going to be the king of the giants. And they say, I know you're the man that can do it. I know that you, if anyone can do it, you are the man that can do it. It just reminds me of chapter 1060, and it reminds me of the way the Straw Hats reacted, and how some of them were like, hey, that sounds absolutely ridiculous. But you know, in their heart, they were like, man, but if there's anyone that can do it, it's you. You know what I'm saying? And it made me want to see a party like that with Luffy down the line, after he becomes the king of the pirates, and after we find the One Piece. And they all have their celebration, and they're like, you know what, man? And Luffy lets out his declaration, I'm going to be the king of the pirates, and ... whatever his dream is. And the rest of the Straw Hats are like, you better believe it, because if there's anyone that can do it, it's you, yo. And it makes me emotional just thinking about it, because I see this as a precursor to Hadruddin eventually becoming the king of Elbaf at the end of the arc. It's what it feels like this is building towards, right? Unless he dies and it forces Loki to become king instead. I think Hadruddin becomes king just based on this panel. It feels like a promise that's being laid out for us here. But it also, for me as a fan, makes me really want to see a similar type of scene with Luffy and the rest of the Straw Hats, similar to a 1060, where instead of them being like, sweet mother of Flagnards, and reacting in the way they did, which was still beautiful, but for them to be like, man, if there's anyone that can do it, it's you, yo. You know we're with you until the end, baby. Especially if it comes after they find the One Piece, or maybe even within this very same arc, right before we head off into Laugh Tale. I mean, that's the type of sequence that I live for, man, and I really can't wait for it. And so those are the kind of things that I haven't been able to stop thinking about in regards to how war is going to be tackled, how misinformation is currently being tackled, how religion is currently being tackled, as well as now how dreams are being tackled within Elbaf. It feels like such a thematically rich arc. One of the reasons why a multitude of the arcs that were in my favorite arcs list at the end of last year were in the placement of the arcs, because of the themes that were being tackled within each of those arcs. And Wano obviously being such an incredibly thematically rich arc, it feels like Elbaf is going to hit us, of course in a different way, but in a similar thematically rich sense, where we're going to explore so many different things throughout a multitude of characters, both within Elbaf as well as through the characters like the Gods and Knights, or through the characters like the Straw Hats, and I'm just so over the moon about the possibilities of this arc, man, and I can't wait to see where things go from here. Now, getting out of the parallels and things of that nature, Luffy is about to find the knocked out giants that were, of course, taken out by Gunko and Shamrock. Excuse me, I'm not sure how that's going to tie into a potential meeting eventually between Luffy and Shamrock. I don't know if it happens early on, similar to how Luffy fought Kaido early on in Wano, or if this is going to start the crumbs that will eventually lead us towards the Holy Knights and the Straw Hats having a face-off. I don't know what this is going to lead towards, but what I can tell you is this. When we see the reactions from Luffy, Zoro, and Nami, Luffy in particular, Egghead as our most recent example, but throughout the course of the entire series, what has he always been consistent with? Anyone who gives me food. When you mess with them, you mess with me. And so when he finds these bodies belonging to a set of individuals who currently serve under an establishment that have been so kind to him and his friends, he's gonna be like, what? Like, y'all wanna try me? Y'all wanna see me? I can't wait to see the reaction. Because Zoro's already feeling trigger happy. He's itching to box. We saw how Luffy felt when Loki brought up Shanks. Gear 4 immediately. What happens when you find the bodies of individuals who gave him food? Or start boxing then? I don't know how early it'll be in the arc, but there is going to be a central motivation there for them to eventually cross paths. And then you add on the Shanks element of this entire thing, and I can't wait for Luffy and Shamrock to meet each other, man. I really can't, dude. It is going to be so incredibly fascinating. Not just from Shamrock being a member of the Holy Knights, so obviously there's going to be the Joy Boy connection and the Gear 5, him seeing Gear 5 in real time, the enemy that has been at the forefront of his entire organization for so many years. But because of the Shanks connection, man, I just can't wait for it. I need them to cross paths. I want to see the reaction from Luffy and how Zoro and Nami help him with that situation. And I want to see Shamrock's reaction. This is the kid that Shanks believes in? This is the kid that Shanks staked everything on? Let me see what he's about. It's just going to be such a great interaction from both parties. And so, obviously, incredibly exciting possibilities there, and we talked about it in the stream last night. But having the Straw Hats versus the Holy Knights, especially if it is a perfect, each Straw Hat has a Holy Knight that they can go out and overcome. It would just be excellent, man. It would just be excellent. And so I'm hoping for it. I'd be down for either the scenario of the Straw Hats versus the Holy Knights, or the Revolutionary Army versus the Holy Knights, whatever it is. I can't wait to continue to see them in combat. Gunko has a very interesting ability that obviously has extremely important implications in regards to Emu potentially having even crazier abilities than we initially thought, or just the fact that she herself was in the room that day. very interesting implications, and the ability itself is also very fascinating. Somebody actually pointed out in chat last night about how proficient she is with her fruit. And that is so true. She is extremely proficient with her fruit, right? And obviously Loki's chained up and he can't do anything about it. But you can tell how proficient she is with her ability. And I really like that, because our first impression of the Holy Knights, of the first two Holy Knights, is that they are obviously they're very competent. Gunko obviously knows how to utilize her ability and utilize it very well. And we just know Shamrock is going to be that guy. I mean, come on. You can see it from a mile away. Now, let's talk about the end of the chapter. Because obviously this has been the thing that I can't stop thinking about. It's the thing that, holy sweet mother of Flagnarts. I've already alluded to it at multiple different points. But let's just read this entire page one by one and go through this. The final page, once again, Viz hasn't dropped yet, but I just couldn't help it. Let's change our tact. Contact Marijoa. What does that mean? We'll have to find out. Does he contact Garling? Does he contact the rest of the Holy Knights? What is that going to lead to? Who knows, but it's going to end up being consequential in some way, shape, or form. It just has to. So that immediately fascinates me. Now, not every piece ends up being useful. I wanted to go about this more shrewdly, but I guess not. What I like so much about that is it goes to show that Shamrock prepares for Plan B. He might even prepare for Plan C. When the first thing does not go to plan, he's unmoved. That's fine. Plan A doesn't go according to plan, we'll go on to Plan B, or Plan C, or Plan D, and if it's a Nier Automata fan, Plan E. And I find this to be so interesting because that is going to give us a different layer of antagonist, of someone who's prepared for, all puns intended, the 1,000 plans. Shout out to Kuro of 1,000 plans. Of an individual who's preparing for the worst. Of an individual who is truly unfazed by things not going according to plan. Similar to how we talked about last night, a Loki who gained so much of my respect at the end of last chapter, but as well in this chapter by being like, yeah, I know you're gonna do this and this, so just go ahead and get over with anyway. Calls the shot and she does it. And Gunko then delivers the blow, right? Similarly to how I love the confidence being exuded by Loki, I'm so incredibly just enamored with the confidence to state that not every piece is gonna be useful in their eyes. Not everything is gonna go according to plan. We came here fully intent on bringing Loki back with us. But you know what? Things have changed. Let's contact the Marijoa. Let's update the situation at hand with this brand new information. And I love that. I love that because when he eventually does get phased, we're already seeing the setup for that here, for an individual who, seemingly unfazed, will eventually have to be phased later on down the line. And when that happens, it'll be extremely satisfying. Just like how nobody could ever land a lick and deliver damage to Kaido when Luffy finally hit Kaido with the red rock. We were like, let's flipping go, man. Let's go. In a similar sense, when we see Shamrock being phased by things potentially going so unaccording to plan, with the X factor of a Luffy or the X factor of a dragon, whatever the case may be, when he eventually gets phased, it's going to be extremely satisfying, man. And so just off of that alone, I can see him being a very compelling antagonist. But then it gets into something even more fascinating than that. Gunko states, not yielding even if it means death, referring to, obviously, Loki. Do we chalk this up to faith? The God's Knights as a concept, as an idea, is already extremely fascinating. The concept of the Holy Land, of Imu, the Gorose, when Sabo specifically states, how ironic is it that we go up to the top of the world where heaven is supposed to be and we find hell? We find the most demonic monsters you could possibly ever imagine at the very top of the world. In a similar sense, the God's Knights, the Holy Knights, now bringing up the concept and idea of someone else doing something in accordance to their own faith. Now we are bringing in the ideas of religious conflict and or doing things within their own hearts, the determination that comes from within, having a center, having a motivation in faith. Faith in what? As One Piece has shown us throughout the course of the series, faith in each other, faith in a higher power, faith in a leader, faith in a king. Now we get into an even more interesting thing, and an even more interesting part about discussing religion within fiction. Now we get into how such things can impact people positively and negatively through the use of something like faith. And when you get into the ideas of gods, kings, and things of the sort, and you bring in faith into it, then the conversation gets really interesting, especially with individuals known as the God's Knights. I mean, faith being tested, things potentially not going according to plan, having to have stake in the faith that things will go according to plan. Maybe that's why Shamrock is not moved, not phased, because his faith in either Imu or in each other, or into his determination, is so unwavering that nothing could possibly shake it, even when things don't go according to plan. Then you start bringing that element to it, and it becomes even more compelling. And so I'm so down with an exploration of faith, in particular when it comes, like I said, to people who are known as God's Knights. It is so interesting to me. So incredibly interesting to me. And so what we have here is the captain of the God's Knights, world noble Figurlin Shamrock, obviously the son of Garling, and then Gunko with the arrow fruit. What does that then lead into? What we were just talking about early on. Long ago, the savage warriors of Elbaf dominated the New World. Long ago, I'm assuming that means back in the times of the Void Century, when they were the biggest military threat on the planet. There's a reason why they've been trying to create their own giants. There's a reason why Ors was feared for so long. There's a reason why so many of these things have been shoved in front of our faces for such a prolonged period of time in regards to the giants. It's because back in the day they were them, and they truly handled business. And whether they were forced into that due to other individuals not accepting them, and they had to survive, and through their survival established them being the dominant power on the planet, that remains to be seen. But one thing's for sure. You look at the way that giants have been portrayed in this story. The highest military threat at one point in time within the verse is most certainly the truth. That is the truth. That's not misinformation. That is the truth. How that information has been carried forward within both Elbaf and over in the Celestial Dragon side of things, that is where misinformation can then be played with. But the truth of the matter is, the giants truly were about it throughout the course of the series. And if you don't believe me, look at someone like a Kaido or an Oars, maybe even a Nika, and tell me that a group of individuals similar to those being on an island. I'm not saying there's an island full of Kaidos, but when your general's a Kaido, when your general's an Oars, when your general is a Nika, come on, man. Come on. When you have a warrior of that magnitude as your general, that's a deterrent in of itself. That is what Green Bull said back in Wano of why he didn't come for all that time, because Kaido himself was a deterrent. When the Giants have these sorts of individuals that could potentially be living under their roof, and it's maybe in multitudes, there's no wonder they were so feared. And so, long ago, the Savage Warriors of Elbaf dominated the New World, so incredibly interested in that line and where that's going to lead us in regards to maybe what we find in the Heaven Realm, in regards to the backstories, what we're going to find in regards to what really ended up happening that time. Once again, going back to last week's chapter with, was Nika a destroyer? Was he a savior? Going back to then Vegapunk's line, which we don't know who was really in the right or wrong side of things with Joy Boy and Emu. It's just, I'm so incredibly fascinated, man, by those things being explored. But the Savage Warriors of Elbaf dominated the New World. The WG will bring them to heal no matter what. No matter the cost. This land is now going to belong to us. If the Straw Hats mobilizing just due to one of the individuals who gave Luffy food have just recently been taken out, and that is enough of a reason for Luffy to want to retaliate. Imagine when those same individuals attempt to take this land, who Luffy and Usopp value more than any other territory that we've seen up until this point. Not because he wants this territory to be his own, but because he genuinely looks up to the people of this land as much as he looks up to somebody like a Shanks. This land means so much to him and Usopp. He's not going to allow anyone to take this land to be theirs, let alone after all they've heard about what's been going on here. So with that being said, the stepping stones are here. The setup is all over. Elbaf is about to give us an incredible, painstaking, jaw-dropping, thematically rich experience that I cannot wait to see what ends up taking place next. Because it's clear as day. Things are about to pop off. And once they do, the things that could potentially be explored both within combat and within the characters and the themes that are interwoven between those conflicts and scenarios. We are looking at a potential top oneer, man. And I mean that wholeheartedly. I mean that as someone who absolutely loves and adores every single arc in this series. It makes it very difficult to rank them, right? Because I hold them in such high regard. Elbaf has the setup. It has the sauce to be one of the greatest arcs in the series. We've seen that within the first 11 chapters of this arc. Unreal, man. And I can't wait to see where it goes. Shamrock obviously is the major highlight, but the potential possibilities of what this could then lead to, not just this stuff, but the stuff that came before it, the stuff from last week's chapter, the Louis Arno stuff, which we still don't know anything about, the time, the difference in time here and that, we don't know, man. So many exciting things. And we're at just the crumbs of the entire sandwich, man. We haven't even got to the bread yet, let alone the ham and the cheese. Oh, man, I can't flipping wait, dude. Battery's running low. I will see y'all next time. Thank you so much for watching. This has been, and I can't stop thinking about, edition of the Afterthoughts. What a magnificent chapter, leading us into what's bound to be a really, really good year for the One Piece manga in 2025. But let me know your thoughts on this week's chapter. Obviously, we talked about it at length last night. but there's a few things that I just had to elaborate and talk about here, because this chapter just truly resonated with me in a lot of different ways, into the things that I really enjoy thinking about in regards to this series. So please, by all means, let me know in the comments down below how you felt about this chapter, how you felt about this afterthoughts, as well as your own personal takeaways from either the things being said within this video or the things that were said within this chapter. Let me know anything that you would like to add on to that. And until next time, I will see y'all in what's bound to be another incredibly exciting installment of the best-selling manga in history, man. No break. No break as far as I'm concerned. No break. So I will see y'all next time. This has been One Piece 1137. 1137, man. Mike, it feels like just yesterday we were on chapter 800, bro.